Okay. You're all so welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Siobhan O'Neill. I'm the interim mental health champion for Northern Ireland, and I'm a professor at Ulster University, and I'm a hay fever sufferer. So there's worse problems to have, I know, but I just like to moan a wee bit today because I'm really suffering. So thanks everybody for joining us, and a particular word of thanks to Kiefer Wilkinson and Rhonda Burns. Kiefer works in my office as my communications officer, and Rhonda is the lead lady on this project and the lead researcher. So they've done all the work. I just kind of rock up and do this kind of do the presenting bit. So thank you for all of the heavy lifting that you've done. Going to start off with a wee introduction to tell you what today is all about, and then we will get into a little presentation. So this is a policy roundtable for a project called Future Minds. So Future Minds is a UK Research Institute funded research network. So it's a series of different, a program of different events, of different activities that we're calling Future Minds NI. So the research network was set up, and we got funding to do this really because the research councils recognise that there's been very little work done in Northern Ireland around the research, the mental health research needs for young people. So what are the research questions we need to be asking? So if you think about the research councils, they fund research, and it's really important now that we have service users, that we have the population involved in deciding what research is funded, and that we have young people involved in that decision-making process as well. And in other regions of the UK, there are groups of young people who influence this process in a more strategic way. In Northern Ireland, we haven't had that. So it's to kickstart that process in Northern Ireland. And it was coming at a great time because we have a mental health strategy for Northern Ireland, which is about improving services and hopefully about improving mental health as well. There's some actions in there that actually look at the causes of poor mental health too. Very important. So what we're doing with this is we're running some pilot projects around recognizing that our population are a wee bit different. Of course, there's been a history of violence, so we need some more information about the impact of that. So we're doing some pilot projects in that area, and then another pilot study is around digital technology and chatbots and digital interventions for mental health. So because that's our area of interest, the group of researchers who got this funding, so we've done some work there to set up to pave the way for bigger studies. But we've also received funding to do a consultation exercise where we consult young people themselves about the research priorities and the areas that they want to see researched. So this is slightly different from some of the other pieces of work that are happening around young people's mental health, where the areas have been identified. We've identified areas, but we're trying to get to research. So what should the research councils be funding in terms of research in Northern Ireland for young people, right? So that's the difference between this and the work, for example, that the NCB did, that the Children's Commissioner's doing, to highlight the problems. We're trying to highlight research. So that's what we're about. Today, we're going to be talking about the results from our consultation exercise and the key research questions. And we're also going to be asking broader questions about how we promote research in Northern Ireland, about how we involve young people in research in Northern Ireland. And we've got some political representatives here as well. So it's about influencing policy. And using research and data and things to influence policy. So we're trying to tie up that end of things today. So we'll see how it goes. We've got some great panelists who are going to be kind of joining us for a more structured discussion, and we want to get your questions as well from the participants. So our panelists here, we have, in no particular order, Colm Gildernew, who's an MLA and the chair of the Health Committee at Stormont. So you're very welcome, Colm. We have Christine Irvine, who's the Mental Health Policy Lead from the Children's Commissioner, from the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People. So Christine, thank you for joining us today. We've got Shari McDade, who's the Head of Evidence and Impact from the Mental Health Foundation. So you're very welcome, Shari. We have John Joe McGrady from Belfast Youth Forum, again, a group who've been very active in influencing and setting the agenda here. So thank you for joining us, John Joe. We have Ines McMurray from the Crisis Cafe. You're very welcome, Ines. And then we have Dr. Rhonda Burns, who's the researcher who was taking forward this project and has just done a great job in the most difficult of circumstances to try and get this off the ground. And so thank you, Rhonda, for that. I'm going to start by talking to you about what our consultation with young people revealed. And hopefully Rhonda will be able to help me with this conversation, because she's been on the ground. I haven't been able to attend most of the groups because I've got just so much on right now. So Rhonda's been speaking to the young people, so she'll tell us about what young people have told us about their mental health needs and about what research we should be doing to help push things forward here. So this is where we share screen and hope that the presentation comes up. Yeah, there we go. And that it's the right screen, so you're not seeing all my other things that I've been looking at in the background. Right, here we go. And I've just got to move this over here too. Okay, super duper. So this is our first round table, where we're trying to mix people up, mix policymakers, researchers, young people themselves, people with various different types of lived experiences. And the second one is on education, and it's because a lot of the areas that came up were around education specifically, because young people spend so much time in education too. So we'll be talking about that separately. So here we are. So our consultation with young people. Well, the question we were asking, just to remind you all, is what is the most important question that researchers should be trying to answer about mental health and wellbeing of young people in Northern Ireland? So we did this through a variety of methods. Rhonda prepared a questionnaire, and it was sent out over social media and to a whole load of different mailing lists, and there was 479 responses, which is really impressive. So we have the responses to that questionnaire, and we also 279 questions that came up as a result of that questionnaire. Isn't that right, Rhonda? That's what that is. Yeah. And we condensed that. I actually say we hear Rhonda condensed that and analysed it and spent hours going through and gripping things together and thinking, is that really the same thing? So we've come up with 12 areas of concern that we need to be doing more research on here. Now, we'll be producing a report at the end of this, and we'll be giving the report to key people, recognising that in our strategy, and it's made its way into the next draft of it, and in the strategy there is this idea of a mental health research centre, and promoting mental health research, and also collecting data, because there's a lot of data floating about there. So if we can collect data in a way, we can promote research. So we can find out more. So we had 279 questions, condensed those into 12 areas of concern. Right. So we'll be telling you about those in a minute. We also held webinars on the areas so that we could discuss the topics with young people, that we could get presenters to talk about their research and what we know, and we could get young people particularly, to talk about the areas of concern for them. We held 5 webinars altogether. The first one was very much around the pandemic and technology and loneliness and stuff like that. And that was a really powerful one. We were at the start of this process then, and these were really live issues and still are very important to young people's mental health. So we discussed that at the first webinar. The second one, we looked at the prevalence study. Now, kudos to the Children's Commissioner and to Christine, who's here today. They really initiated this and got it on the agenda. The idea of a prevalence study where we find out what are the mental health needs of Northern Ireland's young people. How many young people suffer from different mental health problems? How much unmet need is there? So we got Lisa Bunting from Queen's to present that prevalence study at our second webinar. And we also had Elaine Murray presenting this study, which is a psychological intervention trial, where I'm involved in this one as well. So we've taken DNA samples and things, so we're looking at the biological basis of mental health there too. And then we had various different young people's groups presenting at that one as well, talking about the issues from their perspective. People from Pure Mental talking about their toolkits, and Youth Action Northern Ireland. The third webinar was around physical activity, and there's just so much evidence that physical activity supports mental health and well-being. And this was a really fascinating one where we had experts in physical activity talking to us about their work, and also about the key research questions that were coming up for them about what we needed to know in terms of physical activity and mental health in young people. The fourth one was around suicide prevention. And that was hosted in conjunction with the newly established Suicide Prevention Research Network in Northern Ireland. So that's another wee thing that I'm involved with there. Myself and Karen Galway wanted to bring together, I've been dying to do this for a long time, bring together all the suicide researchers in Northern Ireland and be more strategic about how we approach this area. So thinking about who are the suicide researchers, succession planning, who's doing PhDs in this area, where is the research, what research do we need? And we had some great presentations there from our friend Rory O'Connor, who's from Northern Ireland, from Sharn, McDonald, who led the suicide bereavement survey there as well. So a great webinar and got a lot of attention there too. The fifth one was around gender identity and sexual orientation. Again, these were issues that were coming up again and again, marginalised young people, but the issue of gender identity and sexual orientation is a mental health issue for our young people very clearly. So we brought together some key groups there. And they presented some of the research evidence that they have on the mental health needs and issues, and presented some challenges around what we need to know here and what we need to do in Northern Ireland to address the marginalisation that's experienced by people who feel that their gender identity and sexual orientation isn't recognised or isn't valued in our society. So homophobia, discrimination, all of those issues come up there. So 5 webinars, they're all free on YouTube for you to look at, and this is being recorded right now as well. So it's all going to be up there for the general public. So it's all very democratic, but it also means we need to be careful about what we say. So just be aware of that in your questions. So those were our webinars. Now I'm going to go on to, let me just check my timing here. What's it just different? Yeah, we're all right. 6 minutes. Okay, so the next wee part of it, I'm going to talk about our areas. So we have 12 areas that were brought up. 6 of them, I think it's 6 or is it 7, relate to health specifically. It's about 7. Okay, Hans is correcting me. We want to tell you what they were and what young people told us, starting with this one, which is how can we ensure that the voices of young people in Northern Ireland are heard? So Rhonda, do you want to just come in and tell me a little bit about that? So do young people feel that they're not heard and they're not being involved, or what were young people telling you about that one?
That generally was what was going on. So the young people were telling us that sometimes they don't feel like they're being listened to. They're keen to be involved right across the board, and they actually have plenty to say if you ask them. So when there's things like consultations, for example, with school inspectors and things like that, they feel that the information they've been sharing is maybe not often taken into account or listened to, because they don't really connect that to any changes that they see, or maybe there are no changes. And they're telling us sometimes that when they ask for a little bit of help, it's not always the help that they asked for, that they wanted, or that they maybe needed. And sometimes they feel like the help that they are getting is what the adults around them think that they actually need. So yeah, in general, there are pockets in that population that feel that they're not being heard.
So it's not even so much that the opportunities are there to communicate, they're asked for their view, but then nothing happens whenever they give their view. Right, so that's going to be a really interesting one, because that's a research question. We think we're consulting young people, and even through this process, I don't know how successful, how many did we reach? We're going to have ask ourselves those questions. But how do we how do we know that we're actually hearing and making changes? And where's the transparency? Because a lot of what I've learned, you know, in this role as mental health champion is that sometimes people ask for things, but it's not possible for all sorts of reasons to shift and change things. But it's how is that communicated, and how is that explained, and whether it's explained, and whether actually we're just, you know, we're making up reasons not to do things because we don't want to do them for whatever, you know, do you know what I mean? So I think that one's quite challenging. So that's one that we're going to be talking about in education and health as well. So where's that feedback loop? How do we involve young people? What do we do? What mechanisms do we need to set up? Are there structures in place? Are young people up for this? What are their expectations? How do we treat them? So now, this is a good one here. How do we establish the causes and extent of mental health difficulties experienced by young people in Northern Ireland? So we've two there. So the causes are the factors that influence. So how do we get to those? How do we promote research that gets to those? And then the extent of mental health difficulties is the other one. So the extent is the numbers, the numbers of people with different types of issues. And I suppose a prevalence study was a good starting point there. Yeah. But so what kind of causes were young people telling you about that need to be investigated?
Well, the young people themselves they knew there was very little information on what the rates of mental health problems within young people are. And the prevalence study now has helped with that. It's a fantastic study. It really piques the interest. But the young people were also saying that as they've struggled over the last year with their mental health, as we've all experienced this global pandemic, it's important that we now use that prevalence study along with being mindful of what the young people are telling us about what they've experienced in the past year. But they also expressed real concerns about what the triggers for mental health illness are, what starts it, and you know, how does it happen, and how if they were unlucky enough to have a mental health issue, what impact would that have on their learning when they're at school and the school life and achievements, and what it would mean for their future careers going forward when they left school. So just a bit the causes, how it starts, the extent of it, and how it would impact their future lives. And it really these questions really piqued my interest a lot.
Yeah, the link with education is so important. I think that's the thing I realized, you know, when I looked at them, a lot of these things link back into their experience in the education system and their fear about whether they're going to get a job, whether they're going to be successful in life and all that stuff, you know, which is really quite shocking. I think that we have young people that are so scared about their future. And the causes and extent. So what are the triggers? What are the factors that influence mental health? How do we influence those? Okay, right, very good. Okay, so next one. Now, this was an interesting one for me. It happened with the National Children's Bureau group as well that I spoke to when I asked them what was the one thing that you would like to change about mental health services, or what is the first top priority, and confidentiality. So confidentiality in mental health and support, perceived confidentiality. So were young people saying that they felt services weren't confidential? What was that about?
For the young people, talked about how if they were going to seek help at school, perhaps, that they felt their parents would immediately be informed about what was going on, and they didn't necessarily want that. They want more a safe space to explore the issues that they're having without other people necessarily knowing about it immediately, because there is a feeling of stigmatization there. But some even mentioned that there's no way to access some of those services, perhaps particularly in school, without other people seeing what they're doing. So there's things like worry boxes in the schools where you can put in a little bit of paper and somebody will contact you, but people can see them putting those little pieces of paper in the worry box. Or they perhaps have to go to a specific room, to a specific teacher at a specific time of the day if they need help. So if other pupils are there or in the vicinity, they know what's happening. So there's a lack of privacy within that. as well then as a lack of confidentiality. And it does feed into the fear, the stigma that surrounds mental health.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the stigma's there. Young people recognize it's there. They want confidential services. They want to be able to talk about their stuff, their deep, dark kind of personal issues. Yeah. And they want to do that in a confidential way. Whereas mental health services just don't, that, you know, services are applying treatments and interventions for particular conditions. And there's always that boundary when you know, if someone's at risk of harm, then confidentiality will be broken. Was it about their parents finding out specifically, Rhonda? Is that
seemed to come up repeatedly? They want that space to explore the issues that they're having before anybody else finds out. Maybe they don't even need to find out, you know. It's just that the fear that as soon as they present, that everybody's going to know, including their parents. And having kids, as you know, Siobhan, mine didn't want to talk to me about those things because I'm too close.
Mm-hmm.
But I was happy for them to discuss that in different arenas without me knowing anything about it. I was more than content with that. But there is that fear. I think it's as well about the safeguarding issues within school. Parents have to be told what's going on, and it's difficult for them to find that safe space to chat.
Mm-hmm. Right, so that's a really it's really, really interesting because it challenges all of those structures, challenges the way we do it. I'm be interested when we're having a conversation later to see what Ines thinks about the crisis cafe model and how they're approaching this issue. You know, the idea of a walk-in place where people can discuss personal issues and talk about their stuff, you know, and how different that is from mental health services as we traditionally have them. So it's a really interesting one. Confidentiality is so important. We need to respect that. It's the idea of viewing younger people as completely separate and independent human beings. I'm starting to try and get that with my 4-year-old. You know, she has her own things and her own way of doing things, and you know, she's not just an extension of me. So, you know, it's all about how we treat young people as well. I think, you know, and respecting their privacy and boundaries there too. So this is a related one. This is factors influencing presentation to services or access to services for young people in Northern Ireland. So we hear a lot about services. What services are there? The waiting lists. How do we get access to a service? What were young people telling you, Rhonda?
So again, confidentiality and safety were the most common sort of areas within this theme. The young people, again, don't feel they have a safe space to discuss the issues, and they're asking for that space and that support that's confidential to work out their problems and their feelings and what they're experiencing for themselves at times when they don't necessarily have the answers for who they are. And there's also a lack of exposure to the knowledge and the language around the issue. So in some ways, slightly alexithymic, where they don't necessarily have the language skills or the labels to be able to convey how they're feeling. Because they just don't, they haven't been taught those skills to identify what's going on within their own sort of bodies and how they're feeling. So if they can't label it and express it themselves, they can't tell anybody else about it either.
And then when it comes to services, there's that sort of breakdown where somebody's handed the Beck depression inventory and asked to fill out, you know, or the GDQ or something, where they're asked, you know, were they able to get out of bed and how many hours were they able to, you know, complete their tasks, activities of daily living, and they're going, this is not relevant at all to my life. It reminds me of Dr. Claire McCauley's dissertation on young people and recovery and what recovery means and looks like. It's just a million miles away from the way that we diagnose and treat mental illness, you know, and there's that complete mismatch. And then services. So services are just not what young people think they should be, in a way. And it's that emotional awareness of how you feel, emotional intelligence, awareness of how you feel and how, you know, how to regulate that, you know, that we need to be taught, having the language to articulate when we're struggling, and knowing the difference between stress and mental illness, stress and crisis and mental illness.
Just don't necessarily have the language skills in place to be able to tell other people how they're actually feeling. So they can't even identify it for themselves. So that's one of the things that came up about why they don't talk to people about the problems, is because they don't know how. They don't know how to express that in a language that other people are going to understand.
Okay, so how do we ensure mental health services are timely and adequate? This is around the quality of services. And again, I'm thinking back to the Children's Commissioner Still Waiting report, you know, found that lots of young people, even when they access services and they were kind of completed their X number of sessions, which is a bizarre way to do this stuff anyway, but when they've completed their 6 or 8 sessions, the services wasn't adequate. They felt their needs weren't being met. So what were young people telling you?
Yeah, this was really interesting. So the young people were telling us that they want support at the point and at the time of need, because when they're coming forward at that stage, they are in crisis and they need help there and then, because there's such a delay for them to actually present for help. And we've heard many cases from different young people across the past year. Anecdotally, they're being, put on a CAMHS waiting list when they do finally get there, but then they'll often age out. And then they have to join the adult mental health services waiting list. So the delay is even longer for them. So for a young person who's finally presented and gone, I need help, I'm really struggling, there's an awful delay in them from when they present to when they actually get help. And the young people want something at that point in time.
And sometimes it's really difficult. We do feel that we're going mad when we're in that state of acute stress, when our world has fallen down or something has happened, because I've been through this like myself, and I remember just thinking, I am going mad here. I just can't. And only there were people around me who were able to help and say, no, actually, that's quite normal. But, and then, the symptoms of mental illness are slightly different, but knowing when they're starting to emerge and being able to tackle them and get the kind of help that you need for them. So it's about the right help at the right time. And that's the second theme of the mental health strategy, is the right support at the right time as well. But how do we do that for young people? And it is a slightly different model, as you say. It's about, did young people talk to you about where services should be located? So what about, did they mention going to their GP, for example, as a route into services, or walk-in centres, anything like that? Because we thought the walk-in centre type model was one that they preferred.
There was some chat at the Crisis Cafe, came up quite a few times about how, because it's confidential, you can go just for a cup of coffee, or you can actually ask for help if you need it at any point in time. So that kind of model had been talked about and how they like that. But they were also asking about, are the treatments that are being used the best that are actually available for the right type, the right type of intervention for the right people at the right time and in the right place. So the general impression that I got is they want more access to services, not just going to their GP, because they did express they felt that GPs were sometimes very quick just to medicate and then stick them on a waiting list for something. So things like, as I say, the Crisis Cafe, there's different models that have been running across Northern Ireland. There's some fantastic work actually going on out there where young people can go and get support, but they don't necessarily always know that it's there. They don't know if it's the right thing for them at the right time either. So that came up quite a bit.
Yeah, one of the things I think it's Pure Mental have been asking for is a directory of services, or some way of this is hugely challenging in a context where you have lots of organisations in the community voluntary sector who are, funded for a project for a year or a couple of years, and then you have the statutory sector with waiting lists for child and adolescent mental health services, and the GP is the gatekeeper there, So the action within the strategy of the single mental health service, or at least a mental health service that feels like it's one regional service with an integrated community and voluntary sector, is really what's needed there. But yeah, timely and adequate choice of treatments that actually work with the right treatment. And we were chatting about this morning at the Institute of Mental Health Sciences conference, and one of the biggest predictors of success actually is the relationship between the person and the counsellor or the therapist or the service provider, so that's really important as well. Receiving that compassionate support is fundamental. But there's also, we know, loads of different models. There's DBT, CBT, counselling, play therapy, equine therapy, arts therapy, so what is the right blend?
One of the things that also came up as sort of as an aside to this was about the postcode lottery for support and treatment and services, that even within Northern Ireland, they felt like where you lived depended on what services you had access to. And so that was quite concerning when it's mentioned a few times.
But that's a reality.
Yeah.
No, it is, though. There is a recognition that the provision isn't equal in all of the different trusts, and the people, have different services in different areas. And actually, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because there's often local need that drives the creation of a service. But then, it's not available for other areas in other parts of Northern Ireland. So that is something that does need to be addressed. So, key components of person-centered services. Talk to me about what person-centered services look like from a young person's perspective.
Well, they don't recognize it as person-centered. They were talking about how, as we'd mentioned just there now, that GPs are often very quick to offer medication without any other support or put them on waiting lists. And they said that they often feel that it's the potential diagnosis or the diagnosis that they've been given that's being treated, rather than them holistically as a person, because some of them have certain issues with anxiety or depression. Other people who suffer from anxiety and depression have other issues that need tackled. So for instance, we had one lovely participant who talked about, breathing exercises. And he said they did absolutely no good for him, because breathe in, breathe out wasn't what he needed to hear at that specific time. He needed the person that was working with him to listen to what he was telling them, so that they could then reflect back to help him find the right course of treatment or intervention or whatever was going to work for him. So not all treatments are right for every person with the same diagnosis, and that's what the young people were saying.
Yeah, and this is so important. Like when you think of the trauma-informed approach as well, where mindfulness is, it can actually be really triggering for people to have to try and go through a mindfulness exercise if they're plagued and tormented by a traumatic experience, and flashbacks and things. Like mindfulness would totally be inappropriate there. So yeah, that one size fits all model. Yeah, and recognizing if someone's got difficulties around bullying, around schoolwork, around exam stress, those are the things that they need to help with. That simply giving them a breathing exercise or asking them to talk about something else is not going to really be relevant. Yeah, I think it's surprising when people generally get to mental health services that it's not what they expect. It's not. Often it's not an opportunity just to talk about the things that are affecting you in the way that, people expect that it should be, and talk about your pain. Yeah.
It can be hard work when you get there.
Yeah, well, it is. So it's always work as well. Yeah. So what is the impact on young people who cannot maintain access? I find this one really difficult, to be honest, Rhonda, because we tell people, like, you need to be healthy. You need your exercise. You need to eat well and sleep well, and there you go. That's the solution, and you'll help your mental health. So young people telling you that they can't do that, and we need to know more about why they can't and the implications of that and how we help them with it.
Yeah, it seemed really relevant now to the past year with the lockdown and things like that. But the young people talked about how they're time poor. that over the past year, they've been working really, really hard through the day doing their schoolwork, and the evenings, then they're working really, really hard doing their homeworks. And they're not even, for some of them, getting time to go for a walk to clear their heads. So they're not being facilitated to have that space to deal with all those thoughts and the things that are going on through the day, speak to their friends, their families, and keep up those social connections. But it was also mentioned there are areas still within Northern Ireland that don't have any green spaces. So even just recently, I was told about the Ardoyne in Belfast has no green spaces. There are 2 community projects running and 1 community centre, and the perception is the community centres never open. But the young people from that area then congregate in a different area. I think it's known as the Hill. And we know when they congregate that there's a lot of risk-taking behaviours and antisocial behaviours going on there. So they're often saying there's nothing for them to do to be able to release the stress and, you know, deal with anything that's worrying them or anything that they're struggling with. It was really interesting, that one.
So this really worries me, because it's like, you know, lots of us are juggling different things and we don't have the time to look after ourselves. And I've been spending a lot of time over the past year talking about self-care and take exercise and do all of this. And actually, you know, and this touches on those social determinants of mental health as well. People who are struggling with poverty, who are living in areas where there's poor transport networks, where they don't have nice things on their doorstep. And we need to improve all of that, and that's a cross-departmental thing. But you know, we need to recognize the limitations of the messages that we're sending out as well, and help young people with this. And a lot of the time what we do is we send in, like, we do a mental health talk, you know, as if we're kind of accepting that all of these social determinants of mental health are, you know, they're there and there's nothing we can do about that, but here's a talk on how to cope, you know, go for a walk. But even the coping strategies aren't there. So yeah, what's the impact on young people, and how do we change it? We need to refine these topics a bit as well, but I think we need more research on how we could change that, how we can restructure things to make meaningful difference to young people's lives, so that their lifestyles are health promoting, which of course is mental health promoting as well. So how we can build in things like physical activity and healthy diet. How do we make that easy for people? And we know that poverty and deprivation are huge factors here. So this is about equality. This is about reducing inequalities as much as anything else as well. So that's great. Sometimes we miss this whenever we have all the talk about mental health. We miss the broader picture. Okay, brilliant, Rhonda. So we're now going to open up a conversation to our guest panelists, and I wonder, would it be useful just to let me close this down? We want to consider here three questions. How can we develop and support research on mental health services for young people, and how can we ensure that the research influences policy and practice, and how can we give young people a role? And just, you know, any of your thoughts on those research topics or issues, or what we have been saying. So I'm going to end my slideshow there. I can put up slides again if we need to. Hang on. I wonder if I just closed off this PowerPoint, what would happen? There we are, back now. Great. Okay, so does anybody want to kick us off? Has any of our panelists got any initial thoughts? Colm, thank you. So Colm chairs the Health Committee, just for anybody who doesn't know what, and Colm involves young people in the Health Committee, and they've been participating in the committee proceedings for the past year, certainly. So Colm, do you want to reflect on what that's been like? And have you talked about research, and are you evaluating whether young people feel heard as part of that process? So talk to me about all of that and anything else. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Siobhan, and thanks for the presentation. Really interesting, I have to say. And I suppose the larger part of my interest in it was the amount of dovetailing there was between what we have heard in the committee and what's coming through in the research as well. And I think that's really useful. I think there's probably a sense now where young people are being heard, but the question is is what they're saying being acted on and implemented in a way that's meaningful and real and making a real difference? And it just was struck through the presentation, and I made a couple of notes actually of the amount of issues that going back into the past and currently that have impacted disproportionately on young people. And that goes right back to the conflict here, which I'm guessing, and it's something I've never really thought of, but I'm guessing young people were the actual victims of a lot of that, as well as the post-generational trauma that was in. And I think we have never really got to grasp with the fact of how intense, but also how long our conflict went on for here. And that is something that's quite, and I think that's unresolved to an extent. But even then, moving forward out of the conflict, and I suppose in some ways we had to move on and maybe not deal with some things, but move on in the greater interest, and that's understandable. I'm not criticising anybody for that, but we moved on without really dealing with it, and we're probably still dealing with it. Then the economic crash came, and that again disproportionately impacted young people and young people's future, and all these things have impacted them at the time and into their future. The environmental crisis that we're seeing unfolding, the COVID outbreak, once again, young people, disproportionate, more vulnerable jobs, more vulnerable in terms of the life markers that they missed out on, all of that. And Brexit, again, has disproportionately, I think, or will disproportionately impact young people. And then you overarch that all with the 24-hour news cycle and the constant reporting of all of these issues. So I think it is obviously it's key that we do get to grips with some of this, that we do hear from young people, include them and act. And I suppose in respect of that, it strikes me from our own engagements in the Health Committee and from what you're saying here, is the diversity of young people. And there is as much diversity within young people as there is, in fact, maybe more within young people. So therefore, the solutions need to be diverse. And when we're talking about access and services, and some people saying that, you know, they wanted confidentiality and privacy, and there will be many people who want that. There are probably other people who want it to be normalized, so that, you know, we have this constant mantra of it's okay to not be okay. But yet, if we put it all behind closed doors, then that could send out a message to other people. So I think the solutions need to be person-centered, in the sense that there needs to be a range of options, and that people can choose from the option that they want. I suppose those are all massive issues to be grappled with, and you know, there are no ready solutions. But I did come back to the whole problem of the lack of multi-annual budgeting, and the lack of being able to plan longer term for services and to properly involve and support the community and voluntary sector, which we know are so good at recognising and already have access and contact with all of very many of our young people. So these are all massive structural issues, and you know, I think we're heading in the right direction in terms of trying to grapple with what it is we need to do. I think actually social prescribing could play a huge role. I'm not sure if it's thought of enough for young people before we go to the referral and the medication and all of that. But you know, is there more we could be doing in that type of line? And the final thought I had, I suppose, overarching all of it, was voting age. It just occurred to me all along, like, would the best thing we could do for young people is not give them a real say? Because I have found in my engagements in the assembly with schools and all, is the refreshing element of creative thinking, of openness, of lack of judgment that young people have. I think we need to not only hear it, but bring it right into our political process and bring it in a real and a meaningful way, rather than kind of what it is that an older generation are going to do for a younger generation. They're quite well capable of coming up with the solutions themselves if we empower them to do more of it. So that's a bit utopian, and I don't mean to be unrealistic, but I do think we need to figure out how we can actually start to involve them more and on an ongoing way. So if they try something out and it doesn't work, or something looks like it works better, we change it. We don't set up silos, new silos, or fixed structures that aren't flexible and reflexive and reflective. Siobhan.
Thank you, Colin. And I totally agree with you. And it was a paediatrician that first sort of introduced this into my realm of thinking, of just reduce the voting age. But we also have lots of young people who are able to vote but don't vote, who don't feel involved, who don't participate in democracy. So it's, you know, it's how do we do that and how do we promote that? I'm looking here for the right phrase. It's the Northern Ireland Youth Assembly. What is happening there? Do you have any is there going to be a Northern Ireland Youth Assembly, and how might that change things and get people involved in changing things and promoting research and have their voices heard?
Yeah, no, the short answer is there absolutely is going to be a youth assembly. I think it's in the process of being recruited for at the minute. It's going to be very diverse. I think people are going to be quite interested when they see the makeup of it, and it is, I think, going to have some impact in that they will not only be sitting in plenary session. The people who don't make it to that stage will also be involved on a panel who will be available for consultations. So people who have applied, and it's well oversubscribed for, I believe. So there will be a bank of people there with whom consultation can be readily done. But they will also be formed in the committee, in the shadow kind of committee format as well. So they'll be able to drill into issues more aligned with what's happening in the assembly. So I think if we genuinely engage with them and we genuinely listen, rather than just seeing it as being a box tick that we've done a youth assembly, if we genuinely bring their views and their solutions in and resource them and finance them and prioritize them, I think it can actually make a difference going forward.
And the way to do that, I think, Colin, is to make it a really have a two-way discussion, so that, you know, if young people want a particular thing, you need to actually respond to that and explain either this is what we're doing in response to what you've said, or this, we can't do it this way, but we'd like to talk to you about doing it a different way. So it's got to be that sort of two-way engagement, and equality and respect are part of that as well, which is great. And yeah, I remember the call went out recently for the Northern Ireland Youth Assembly. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go to one of our young people now. Maybe Ines, would you like to go next and just give me some of your reflections, if that's okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like Colin said, we really need to listen to the young people, because if it's a young person's issue, no one knows more about it than the young person themselves. And I heard you say at the start that there is no statutory youth bodies in Northern Ireland, but there's so many youth bodies out there, because young people in Northern Ireland, they don't need to be given a voice. They already have one. They just need to be heard. And there's so many bodies out there. Like the Youth Assembly is coming now, but we also have the Secondary Students Union, we have Pure Mental, there's a recently established Wellbeing Council from across Northern Ireland, there's the Crisis Cafe Advisory Board, which I'm a part of, there's the Youth Forum, Belfast Youth Forum's here today, and the Northern Ireland Youth Forum, there's the UK Youth Parliament, and I could go on and on, but I don't think we have time for it. But there's so many young people who want to be involved in these decisions and who are well able to speak out on them, but just aren't given the chance. And as well as that, I think it's important that we are listening to young people, because there is so many consultations, and it's great to see that here today especially. And I was at one yesterday with Rhonda, and it was great to be able to speak about these issues. But as well as that, sometimes young people feel, sometimes in school and in other consultations, that, you know, they're listened to and the box is ticked, that the school has checked how they think about the mental health resources, but are they actually heard? Is anything actually done? Because sometimes, understandably, when you say to someone this isn't working, they'll say no, it is working, and this is proved, and it's been done before, and, you know, we'll continue to do it. And young people are being listened to, but they're not really being heard. And it is difficult to hear that things like CAMS aren't really working for a lot of people, but it's also important to hear that there is an alternative to that. It's not just that we don't want this system, it's that there's other alternatives out there, like the Crisis Cafe. And just for anyone on this who doesn't really know what the Crisis Cafe is, it's a youth-led organisation that gives clinical help in a non-clinical setting, because I think young people my age, I was saying it to Rhonda yesterday, we can barely ring up and order a pizza, never mind ring up your GP and ask for a mental health appointment. And there's a big difference in importance there. But Crisis Cafe, you can go in on the first day and ask for help, or you can wait 6 weeks and then ask for a one-to-one. And it's that relationship that's built up as well, because it was touched on during the presentation, but I was talking to Louise, who is one of the founders of the Crisis Cafe, and she says that, when you don't have that relationship with the person that's giving you the counselling and giving you the treatment, the outcomes aren't going to be as good, because you don't trust them. Like if you met someone on the bus, you wouldn't open up to them about them. And that's the same when you just walk in and meet a counsellor. It's that same, you don't know them, and there needs to be that relationship and that trust, and that understanding and that mutual respect and the confidentiality as well. And as well as that, what Colm also linked into was the long-term funding, because there is all these brilliant ideas and all these things that are going on, but we need to know that these are going to be there in the future. And it's things like Crisis Cafe and other voluntary services and community organisations that we need to ensure that they're going to be there for generations to come, because I know I'm 18 now, so I'm getting a bit too old for everything. But I want to know that young people are going to be able to access it when they need it, because if I had what all the people at the Crisis Cafe had when I was 15, I know that things would have got a lot better a lot more quickly, and you wouldn't have had to suffer through that. What's really wrong with me? Am I just stressed, or is there something else? And I was, just to finish off on the fact that I was sitting down with Louise the other day, actually talking about what I was going to say here, and I was just sitting and looking around the cafe and realizing that these young people, they're struggling with their mental health, and there is something wrong there, but the fact is that they're there to get better, and you could see them laughing and having their cup of coffee and doing art and Jenga and making jokes and just really enjoying life. And that's what young people are supposed to do, and to give them the opportunity to do that by funding these mental health research and by really organising in priorities.
Very good, brilliant. And the Crisis, and we keep going back to Crisis Cafe as a model, but it was developed by young people for young people. And the really interesting thing for me was when I heard Crisis Cafe, I thought, no, that sounds like a great idea, but let's not call it Crisis Cafe, because we have crisis services, and we don't want to confuse young people. And actually then realizing this is the title that young people gave it, because that's how they're feeling, and that's what happens when you listen to young people, when you actually really involve them in developing interventions and activities. I would like to know more about the magic ingredients. What is the secret sauce that makes Crisis Cafe work? And so that's where the research is. Is it about the relationships between people, or so what is it about that model? And how does it work? What does it use? How can you recreate it in different types of settings? So things like that. What part of it is like a treatment, a counselling type treatment, or what part of it is feeling that you're not stigmatized, that you're part of something? I don't know. So creating art and doing music together and just being together as an an intervention that's effective. It helps regulate people. So that's where the research for me, where I would like to see more research and evaluation of who's using that service. Who's it bringing in? Are they the same young people who are using all the services, or are different groups of young people who feel marginalized, are they connecting with services like that? So what groups are we getting at, and what are the groups who's still sitting at home suffering and struggling alone? Those are the questions that I would like to see answered as well in terms of the research. So I'm going to go now. We're giving everybody a chance to do a wee spiel, and then we'll take your Q&As, right? So get your questions in. We have one in already. So if you've got questions for any of these young people, or me, or Rhonda, or Colm, just let us know about any of the areas, and also about research or ideas or thoughts on the kind of the research topics, and on how we involve young people more in this whole process. So we're going to go to Christine next, if that's okay. Christine, from the Northern Ireland Children's Commissioner's Office, and of course they have groups of young people, panels that are very much influencing what the Children's Commissioner says and her priorities and what she asks of government, and there's that two-way process. And I think it's a brilliant example of government being held to task and held accountable for their decisions. So tell me a bit more about what you're doing and your thoughts on what we're talking about.
Yes, great. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I'm sorry Kula couldn't be here, but she's other things happening. But I work closely with her on this, so I think we'd be saying the same things. I think she'd be saying the same things. So really what I'd say is, firstly, I suppose for anybody that's online that doesn't know who Nikki is, Nikki was set up under a specific piece of legislation to safeguard, promote the rights and best interests of children and young people, and in all of its work to have particular regard to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I think one of the important things I could bring to today's conversation is about the value of using a rights-based framework for research, and in terms of any sort of analysis or understanding of policy, practice or legislation that's developed that could have an impact on children and young people, because as we know, everything impacts on children and young people. Yes, there's specific children and young people services and policies that are developed, but young people are affected by lots of the same things that adults are because they're members of society. So I suppose just to make that point as well, that sometimes we forget about engaging with children and young people on things that are population wide, but it's important that we engage children and young people on all policies and legislation in most cases. But if I just go back to the issue around rights-based framework and its use in research, my most recent example of applying that and showing its worth was in the review of mental health services and support that Nikki did in 2018. And it really was a brilliant way of not missing out on anything. And we talked earlier about the need to take a holistic approach to our understanding of children's health and well-being, including their mental health. And I think using a rights-based framework makes that doable and means that you don't forget important things, that you don't forget the impact that physical health can have on mental health, that all the social determinants of mental health, the environmental factors that play a huge part in children's health and well-being, particularly those very young ages. And not to forget about the very young children, the infants, their voices come through in their parents and carers. So it's about recognising the role they have for very young children as well. The rights-based framework is really, really critical too in understanding the need for coordination and integration across departments, because when you look at rights, you're thinking about education, you're thinking about health, you're thinking about all the different rights that children have in those respects. And the only other thing that kind of really comes to mind that I think is important to state is that in our work around implementation of our review of mental health services and support, where we've had most impact is by involving young people at every stage of the process, from the planning stage, the report writing stage. Obviously, it's their views and experiences that are central to the work that we did. And then, of course, the implementation has been really critical. Nobody can talk about children and young people better than themselves. And in any meetings I've been part of where we've involved children and young people in them, people have pricked up when young people have started to talk about their own issues for themselves. And that was really important in some of the sessions we did with committees and all party groups. They really wanted to hear directly from the people affected by the decision making that they're doing up in Stormont. And I know Colin has been really, really brilliant in terms of chair and pushing that and making sure that children's voices are heard. But it is true that that's only one part of the process. Is then about ensuring that there's mechanisms in place to ensure that young people's views are heard and informed in decision making. And that's the thing that we really do need to work on.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Christine. Yes, the rights-based approach, really, really important. And that when you look at things like confidentiality and privacy and a rights-based approach, it is a game changer, because that's sort of a human right. So how are we providing those services that are confidential, that respect young people's human rights? And even the access to services, in a timely way, and services that meet their needs, everything shifts. So that's really, really excellent, important work that you're doing there. I'm going to go to John Joe next. Again, as a young person's advocate and representative, talk to me, John Joe, about what are the factors that influence young people's mental health in your view, and how can we get young people involved in research and setting the agenda and changing policy and practice in this area?
All right. First off, I thought the presentation was very well done. And from looking at the presentation, there was some stuff came through that I mightn't have thought about, but quite a lot of it I thought, from my experience anyway, growing up, that it was quite spot on. I'm just going to touch on some of the points that Colin brought up earlier. You need to treat young people with respect and equality. The fact that young people aren't involved in the democratic institutions sets us at a bad foot. The fact that when young people go to work at the age of 16, they're paid half the wage that someone is at 21 or 25. There's so much stuff in place to put young people at a far lower standard than the rest of the population. Sorry. One of the main things I think that it's had a particular impact over the last while anyway, and I'm not in school no more, I feel a bit old saying this, but from speaking to friends that are in school, the fact that back in January they were told they were going to have no exams, and then come April they were hit with internal assessments. So there's so many issues, and the fact that Colin was talking about earlier on that we can't plan for multi-year strategies, and that's a whole other argument for another day. But there's so many societal problems we know, we recognise, but we're not too sure how to solve. And as was spot on, there is a million organisations across the 6 counties that have young people involved. The young people want to have their voices heard, but are just being ignored. And I've been in God knows how many consultations where you've met and you've made these points, and it's never came through in the final reports or strategies, whatever else. So it's about actually engaging with the young people, taking them serious and treating them as equals. Now, I'm glad to see the youth assemblies being set up, as Colin was saying about the shadow committees. So it's about actually engaging with the young people, fundamentally engage with them, treating them as equals, and taking them serious in what they're saying, because they're the experts in their own lives and they know how to fix these things.
Brilliant. That's exactly it. So the organizations are there. We do need to engage with them more. I think it would be helpful. Well, certainly it would have been helpful for me to have an understanding of how government works and how policy works and how things change and what all these committees are. I only really started to get involved, like when I was asked to be mental health champion, then I was looking, right, there's all these government departments, and then there's the Department of Health, the Department of Education. How do they fit together? How do we get changes on the ground so that things feel different? You know, and that was something I've learned in my 40s. I think a guide to that, a way of communicating that whole process to the public and to young people, I think that would help enormously. I don't know whose responsibility that is, but that's something. So the number of times I've sat with groups saying, "Oh, this is how it works." So this is for example, this is a health strategy. You know, it's in the Department of Health. Why is it not covered education? You know, that's a really obvious one. And then you have people like Kula, the Children's Commissioner, say, well, it should. You know, why do we have to abide by these structures? Let's just, you know, so that stuff's radical, but that comes from an understanding and knowledge of how the whole system works. You know, to have the confidence to say, actually, it doesn't need to be like this. We can do it this way. And there's this committee. But oh my goodness, like it takes years and months to learn about where everybody fits and who's really got influence and how you have influence. You know, even the difference between your assembly and your council and what they do and who's got responsibility for what. I think that would be very, very useful if we could all have that understanding and that knowledge. So anyway, that's just my thoughts from that discussion. We're going to move now to Shari McDade. Sorry, you're last on the list, but certainly not least. So the Mental Health Foundation, this was one of the responses to the strategy they kindly shared with me before I put on mine, and it hugely influenced what I said, because they're a very, very strong section on mental health inequalities and the social determinants of mental health and how we reduce the impact of inequalities. So we're hearing a lot about the stress and the pressure that young people are under and the effect of poverty and adversity influencing young people's mental health. You know, so their response to the strategy had some amazing ideas around all of this and how we measure it and how we track it going forward, and the need for a cross-departmental approach to this. So Shari, can you give me your thoughts on what you've heard so far, and maybe even a wee bit about what the Mental Health Foundation do as well to introduce us to the work? Thanks, Siobhan, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate on the panel today. And it's been very interesting to hear everyone's perspective. The foundation is a UK-wide organization, and we focus on prevention of mental health difficulties. So there is good evidence that mental health difficulties can be prevented, but oftentimes the focus of debate tends to be on how do we respond to people who already have a diagnosis or a disorder. But actually what we do is try to put the lens a bit more towards all the things we could do so that people don't end up having to experience a disorder, an enduring disorder, or a diagnosable disorder, because we've picked up and given their life circumstances a better chance. So I'm very interested in the concern that the young people identified around the causes of mental health difficulties. I think the young people are very perceptive to say that there isn't very much information about the causes, because it's true that the balance of research has tended to be on treatments and interventions and treatments rather than on the causes and the triggers that the young people said they're interested in. And that's very much where the foundation would say there needs to be a strong research agenda looking at those causes. So we talk about this as a public mental health approach, that is addressing those factors that influence people having a mental health difficulty. And we've seen in the prevalence study is starting to point to some of these factors, but there is much more research that's needed in this direction. What we're looking at is what are the life circumstances that are going to help young people to have better mental health, and which of those circumstances are most important or more important to address. We know that poverty is internationally recognized as a key factor in mental health and in giving rise to mental distress. And we know, for instance, that socioeconomically disadvantaged children and adolescents are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop mental health problems. The prevalence study in Northern Ireland showed some evidence of this. Rates of total mental health difficulties were much higher for the young people in the most deprived section of Northern Ireland society compared to the least deprived section of society. And adverse childhood experiences were linked to deprivation, and parental mental health problems were linked to deprivation. So there are hints of this, but we need to understand this in much more depth. We need to figure out what is it about poverty that makes it difficult for children to have the best possible mental health. Is it their economic situation? Is it materially that they don't have enough to support their well-being? Is it the fact that their families have to compare themselves to families that are better off? That social comparison idea? Is it that they're less socially connected and have less social supports? So these are some of the research questions that we could look at in more depth. Similarly, we would say it's very important to look at the whole area of respect, prejudice, discrimination, experiences of bullying, and look at these on the basis of gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability. There were some signs in the prevalence study of the importance, for instance, different experience that it made depending on your gender, what types of disorders or difficult behaviors you were exhibiting based on your gender. So that we need to have much more information about those factors, because that will help. When we have that kind of evidence, it will provide a strong basis for influencing government policy and showing that government policy needs to be much stronger in preventing prejudice and discrimination, and preventing bullying, and in
affirming people's identities. So, you know, we will have a basis, for instance, for programs in Northern Ireland that are much stronger on empowering girls and young women so that they don't feel like self-injury is the way that they have to express their distress, but that they feel more able to speak up and be heard around their different experiences of distress. That's just an example. And then just to touch on one other area that affects our mental health that would really warrant research is the whole area of access to nature. The foundation just published a report that begins to describe the current evidence base on how connecting with nature is very good and beneficial for mental health, but also identifies, just as Siobhan was talking about, that not everyone has access to green and green space where they can get the benefits of spending time in nature. And that many people, too many people, again, based on gender differences, race, ethnicity, youth, young people, often feel that they can't be safe in local parks or green spaces. And so this points to the need for more research about how we can improve people's access and improve the levels of safety and learn more to demonstrate the important benefits of green spaces. So it's in those kinds of directions, which I think really speaks to the young people's identification of causes, triggers, but also how do they maintain a healthy lifestyle? And just as you were saying, Siobhan, we need to put energy and resource and our research efforts into looking at the barriers that young people face to trying to have good mental health. You know, how do we, how hard is it to have a good mental health when you're in a very competitive school environment, when you have very high pressures on grades and fitting in with a very particular school structure in order to make sure that you can make a decent living when you get out of school. Those are those are circumstances that may not suit all children and young people, and yet we don't know enough about how their lives and their circumstances are hindering their ability to have the best possible mental health. So that would really be what we would like to see coming out of this process.
That's a really helpful contribution, Shari. Thank you so much for that. And just when you're talking about, the experiences of young people in Northern Ireland, I think the elephant in the room in all of these discussions is the conflict and the divisions that we have in society, and even the divisions in our education system, because that is another layer of complexity that Northern Ireland young people have to deal with and navigate on top of everything else. So there's been very little research in this whole area. So what is the impact of the intersectionality between your identity in terms of the two communities in Northern Ireland? Or do young people still feel that's relevant to them? Do they identify with one community or another? And how does that intersect with everything else that's going on in their lives and their ability to connect socially? And what's the impact of the education system on that? So how does shared education impact on mental health and your sense of identity? And your pride and your in your tradition and your cultural identity and group identities, all of those things are causes of stress and pressure for young people in Northern Ireland, and they haven't really been investigated, and they're rarely addressed. But I think these are the types of things that we really need more research on. And of course, we all live in families and communities that have been affected in various ways, and Colm alluded to this as well. In various ways. As a result of the Troubles. So we're living in homes where the Troubles is still impacting on those relationships that we have with family members. So how do young people navigate all of that on top of all the other stressors and pressures that they have? really, really important research questions, I think, for here. One of our questions was around the education system and education and the curriculum. So that was from Ava, and Ava's asked, you know, turn to the mental health education in the school setting. So I just wanted to add on top of what Rhonda said there, that the Department for Education have put out a framework for schools. And again, it's really interesting that it's a framework, and people want changes to the curriculum, and this is where understanding how government works and where everything fits can be quite important, because curriculum changes take a long time and they're really difficult to achieve, whereas a framework is something that we can, you know, we have right now that we can give to schools, and if it's resourced, and we include funding for schools to do this, we can make sure that all the schools do it. But so it's about the difference between embedding it into the curriculum and having something that we can move forward with straight away with a bit of funding. But you're right, I think it should be in the curriculum. I would want politics and child development and all of those things in the curriculum, so that will make a big difference, I think, too. So we have some other questions here as well. So let me have a little. So Finola Ferry has mentioned the Administrative Data Research Centre in Northern Ireland. And Finola, are you there? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Can we give Finola the mic there? Is it possible to do that? No. So anyway. So what Finola's group are doing is they've got all the data that's collected as a matter of course, they start to analyze that and answer important research questions there. Okay, I think we can get you speaking, Finola.
Hi there.
Hi. Sorry for putting you on the spot, but it's just a really question we had about the data that we already have that we could use.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
Just in relation to the key research question in particular, looking at the causes, extent and impact of mental health difficulties among young people. I think what I work for the Administrative Data Research Centre in Northern Ireland, and what we can do is we can link in population-wide data from the census, some health data, education data is kind of in the pipeline. And what it allows us to do, because it provides a whole profile of the population, we have such detailed information and big sample sizes, which isn't often the case with other survey work. It would allow you to look in in a lot of detail the causes and the extent of mental health problems, but then you could also look at kind of the trajectories of young people with mental health difficulties in terms of their educational outcomes, and then their employment opportunities, what kinds of jobs are they going into. So I just think it's something that might be worth a follow-up discussion. We're in the process now of planning our key studies for the next 4 years of funding. So it's kind of a good time maybe to discuss this type of research and how it could be looked at in terms of big data across Northern Ireland.
That's really exciting, Finola. What we will do anyway is we'll share our report with you and have a discussion about the research priorities that our young people develop. But what the question I would have for you is, are young people involved in influencing the research agenda for the ADRNI? And would you be interested in having more sort of discussions with the young people? Of
course, yeah. I mean, one of the key remits or the key emphasis in terms of the administrative data research is, because we're using public data, we should be engaging in research that has public benefit. Now, the research studies that I've been involved in myself so far haven't been focused on young people. It's more on adult mental health issues, and I do have a big interest in jobs and mental health. But for all our other studies, we would have established steering committees, so that would be something that we would do from the outset. But what I think is great about your initiative, the Future Minds, is that you've done so much groundwork already. That's a gift to researchers, that level of engagement. Something that we would hope to achieve over years of a project. So you're kind of giving researchers a head start in that respect. So it's definitely something that I think our team should have follow-up discussions with youth.
Great, Fionnuala. Let's set up a meeting even between yourself and Rhonda and yourself and whoever else wants to be involved from your end. And we'll just chat about that and where we think we should be going. I mean, the use of existing data is just such an important thing as well, and even what has happened during the pandemic. So there's been a lot of kind of natural experiments that have happened that we should have been collecting data on as we've been going through. So we moved everybody, we stopped school for young people, and we discovered that there was a group of young people there whose mental health got better, you know, and that is really interesting. So what is it about school that was so difficult for those young people that meant that being at home was the being at home was preferable or better for their mental health? And then there was the whole thing around the transfer test, you know, what should have gone ahead there, and whether the tests, so they were cancelled in the end, but there was so much uncertainty. And actually what I was hearing was that the uncertainty was worse than the test, you know. So again, it's about collecting data and understanding what the impact of all of these things were. And a lot of the time I'm concerned that policy is dictated not on the basis of the evidence, because there's often not evidence, but it's dictated by the loud voices, the people who write to the ministers who say, my child's, I've a lot of these letters sitting as well, you know, and they tend to be from parents who are, you know, maybe paying a lot for tuition for their children, and they tell me their children really are invested in these tests and really want to do well, and that their mental health will be impacted if they didn't do the transfer test, you know. And I'm looking for evidence one way or the other what actually is the effect of this test, and how do you weigh that up against the risk of COVID and everything else. So we don't have the data, we just don't have the evidence, so we're relying on anecdotes, and it's the powerful people again that get heard there. So Shara, you wanted to come in on that, yeah?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just to affirm what you're saying, really around that we need to do much more research with young people and not be afraid to do so. Oftentimes, I think the studies, you know, researchers want to do studies with young people, but there are so many hoops to go through in terms of ethics that it becomes the last thing that's done, and we go to the adults first because it's easier. But for instance, in the foundation, as part of, you know, we're doing a pandemic study that we've been doing UK-wide since last March. Every 4 to 6 weeks, we ask adults what they think around the pandemic. But we also made sure to do a teen study in that. Now, it took us a little longer to get going on the teen study, but we will have, at the end of it, around 3 different times that we will have asked teenagers what their experience of the pandemic is. And it's really powerful evidence. For instance, in last September, just to name a few facts that really enlighten on this, 68%, and apologies that unfortunately the data collection was only done in Britain, so it's British teenagers, but 68% of British teenagers surveyed say the pandemic will make the future worse for people their age. Half said that they had been unable to stop worrying at times during the 2 weeks before the survey. And 6 in 10 said they had no one to talk to some of the time or often during the pandemic. So this is really powerful evidence. And it's just a way of saying that we need to keep that going. We need to make the effort and get over the hurdles to be engaging regularly, directly in research with young people so that their experience is part of the picture of how we're planning public policy.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the things that we've learned during this pandemic have been quite surprising. You know, the impact of stress around exams and the need for certainty. It really did amaze me, and I think many others were surprised at this as well, of how important and vital that is. And I think it reflects the inequalities in society where you have that scarcity and people feel that they won't get a job, or that they'll be, you know, they won't be part of the right social group if they don't get the right grades and things. So that's something that I certainly learned whenever I consulted with young people. Ines, do you have a question there or a comment? Yeah.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, like, those are pretty shocking numbers that Shari's coming out with, but they're probably shocking to the adults in the room, but they're not shocking to young people and to people like, you know, me and John Joe and other young people, because this is what we're living with. And when we did some research with the Crisis Cafe back in March, we had similar numbers. I think it was 83.7% of children, young people said that the online learning had affected their mental health negatively. And it's just, it's gone too far, and we really do need to focus on what we can do right now to help these young people, because we hear a lot from, you know, politicians and certain health spokespeople that, you know, it's coming later on down the line, and, you know, in a few years we'll have this, but it's not in a few years. We need it right now, especially with the pandemic. We need proper long-term funded services. And as well as that, what you said about exams, I finished my A-levels about 3 weeks ago now, and it's exactly that. It's that uncertainty. It's almost worse than the exams, and it is the fact that there's so much academic pressure on young people in Northern Ireland, especially with the grammar school system that we have. And it does feel like, you know, if you don't get certain grades, what is your future going to look like, when we know that, you know, grades only determine one part of really where you'll go to university and where you'll work. And it's letting young people know that, and it's saying to them, you know, grades are important, but they're not the be all and end all, and giving young people the certainty and putting it back in their hands that they can improve their mental health. And it's not all as academic as it is at the minute.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and I think it's the experience of young people in Northern Ireland that we need to look at again as well, because as you said there, the grammar school system, our systems are slightly different here. You know, our education system's different. So why are the stakes higher? Are the stakes higher in Northern Ireland for Northern Ireland young people? And nearly every survey that I've seen, you know, even around the pandemic, Northern Ireland's worse. We're worse for everything. The parents, the rates of the proportions of parents who were struggling in the pandemic were far much higher in Northern Ireland. So, and I think it's really important that we have Northern Ireland samples in those UK studies, Shari, as well. You know, that's so important, because we are different, and how do we promote that agenda, and how do we make sure that we have we include and we represent Northern Ireland and over-represent Northern Ireland, and have our young people represented in all of those UK-wide and international studies. So Christine, do you want to come in there as well?
Yeah, just because it relates to lots of what people are already saying around the need to up our game in terms of the type of research that we're doing, and which involves young people. And I think the voluntary community sector have really showcased how to just go out there and speak to young people about these difficult issues. It's not going to make them feel worse, because if they're feeling bad, they will still feel bad. And in fact, it can be really empowering to talk about some of this stuff and be given agency and a platform to do that. The other thing I would say is around young people who are lesser heard, young people who have disabilities, learning disability, physical disabilities. The prevalence of poor mental health is so much higher in those groups, yet the amount of research that we're doing around young people's needs, causes and contributing factors to poor mental health, and what support and services are out there for them and how effective it is. There's just so little, and Nikki's mental health review really showcased that, which is why Nikki is really pushing that point wherever we can about the need for more research with respect to that group of young people with complex needs such as alcohol, addiction problems with mental health. Sometimes it's called dual diagnosis, but I try to avoid that because it's more of an adult service terminology. But I really feel there's a lack of research that looks at really unpicking all the complex pieces that go alongside poor mental health in children and young people, and alcohol and drug is you know, a growing issue in Northern Ireland that we really need to grasp the nettle of.
Yeah, you're right, Christine. We have the highest rates of deaths from alcohol in the whole of the UK here, you know, and there's an issue there around how we dealt with the troubles as well, and the use of substances. We're going to just finish with a wee comment from Colm, and then John Joe, if you're interested in coming in there as well, and then we need to close it because we're at time. So Colm, go ahead.
Yeah, I was reflecting on some of the things that Shari had said there in relation to what John Joe and Ines had said earlier. And I think we are far too inclined and far too quick to medicalise and individualise a lot of these problems. And a lot of it goes right back to what John Joe's saying there, even in terms of esteem and in valuing and in paying people proper money, providing proper housing. So much of the other well-being things that we need to, if one thing COVID has proven is that we allowed our public health system to become basically dismantled and be replaced by individual health. And I think we need to go back in terms of mental health. We also need to see a greater emphasis on early intervention and prevention. And everyone in this meeting knows instinctively that if we can do that, you actually would generate savings down the line. Not only would you treat people quicker and better, but they would be easier. The solutions will be easier at the time that the young people have continually said in these recent contacts, they want the help when the crisis is there and where they need it, not to be put on a list and either resolve the crisis or the crisis worsen. So I think that's, and I think in terms, we need to go right back to basics in terms of infant mental health strategy and early years support and all that. I think those are key elements of it all. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Colm. Thank you very much. Thanks for everything you're doing to support mental health and the Health Committee and all your work to engage with young people as well. So John Joe, do you have any closing comments for us?
I did, but then Colm said it all, so no, but 100%. I think everything Colm said there was spot on. No, and I mean, again, just my earlier point that to actually address these issues, you need to speak to young people and actually have us on the same level, and that needs to be across the board in terms of education, in terms of work, in terms of housing, all these issues. You start improving people's material conditions, then you'll start to see some improvement. But that's everything from me. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do need to know more about what life is like for young people in Northern Ireland. And what are the factors that influence their mental health in our very unique society and given our history and everything else that's going on. And I think we need to know more about, you know, what has happened to young people's mental health through this pandemic and the positives as well as the negatives. So that's been a really helpful discussion. And we're going to go off now and refine all of these areas and add to our report. We have another event on the 17th of June, and there we're going to be talking about education and the education system and young people's mental health and data and research there, what we need. So you're very, very welcome to join us there. And we have Chris Little, Kula Yusuma, the Children's Commissioner, and some other people there as well. So follow us on social media and follow me as Mental Health Champion. And thank you so much for all your contributions today. And this is going to be going out on our social media and our channels and on YouTube. So share that when it comes along. And thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.